Live from Austin, Texas, it's the Plutopia News Network Happy Hour. Our guests this time are all representing the Board of Directors of EFF Austin. The Not Ready for Cable News players are here: Maggie Duval, Scoop Sweeney, and another guy who can tell you a lot about EFF Austin, Jon Lebkowsky.
Yeah, I actually do know a lot about EFF Austin. EFF Austin was formed, it kind of spun off from the National Electronic Frontier Foundation around 1991 or two. I think it was 1991. And what happened was that when the Electronic Frontier Foundation was formed, it was supposed to be a community organization. And they were going to have chapters, kind of like the Sierra Club has chapters all over the U.S. So their first big case was in Austin, the Steve Jackson Games case, which we may have a chance to talk about. And Steve convinced them that Austin should be their first chapter. It was kind of a hotbed of internet activity at the time. And there were a number of people who were enthusiastic about forming a chapter here. And a subset of those people became the first board of directors for EFF Austin. And I was on that board, and I was the first vice president. And later, some years later, became president. And my last run as president, I was president a couple of times, and my last run of presidents lasted for like 15 years. Enthusiastic about forming until a couple of years ago when, and a subset of those, I'm getting an echo. A couple of years ago, Kevin Welch took over as president, and Kevin will hopefully be joining us here. I don't see him here yet. So EFF Austin has been a local, actually Texas, not necessarily local Austin, organization dedicated to what we sometimes call cyber liberties. The mission statement of EFF Austin is this: EFF Austin advocates establishment and protection of digital rights and defense of the wealth of digital information, innovation, and technology. We promote the right of all citizens to communicate and share information without unreasonable constraint. We also advocate the fundamental right to explore, tinker, create, and innovate along the frontier of emerging technologies. And joining us here tonight so far is Chris Boyd, who is a longtime member of the EFF Austin board. Maggie Duval, who is also here with us every week anyway, a regular on Plutopia News Network, but is also a member of the board. Ritika Gopal, who is an in-house lawyer at WP Engine and is a member of the board. David Hensley, who is EFF Austin's resident reporter and researcher. And hopefully Kevin Welch will join us, the president of EFF Austin.
I'm here, John.
Okay. So
Just
Kevin
joined.
Welch is here too. So I've introduced everybody, and I think the first question to get us rolling is, what are you guys working on now?
Who wants to go first, or do I have to as president?
Or we could just have a really long pause.
You can pull rank.
What are we working on right now? Well, let's see. EFF Austin relevant things we're working on right now. Probably two things are on my radar. One, we're going to have the next edition of our monthly meetup next Tuesday at 7 p.m. on our WebEx account. So you can go on Meetup or Facebook or Twitter for EFF Austin to find the information about joining. But we're going to be talking about facial recognition and algorithmic bias. So that should be a not at all currently relevant discussion, which actually ties into the other thing that I am currently working on, which is we are partnering with EFF on one of their campaigns, specifically about trying to get bans on facial recognition for law enforcement passed in various U.S. cities, EFF's About Face campaign. So after speaking with the guy who runs that at EFF Nash, we're currently working on gathering signatures on their petition so that we can present it to Austin City Council and hopefully get some buy-in in the current police reform movement that is going on. I've gotten an agreement from one of the board members of Austin Justice Coalition that they will co-sign on our petition once we've hit a sufficient signature count to warrant going to council with. So that's what I'm working on. Cool.
How about everybody else?
I'm not sure how I can follow up with that, but what I'm working on, I'm keeping close tabs on developments with CDA 230. And for those that don't know, it's a very important piece of legislation that, basically allows the internet to be the way that it is, providing a safe harbor for online platforms and for it to flourish. So that, user-generated content can, be shared and uploaded and consumed. And so there's been a lot of developments with that, in the last few months, especially, now that we're seeing misinformation being spread around social media in the midst of COVID. And, there's questions popping up about, what level of responsibility, or if there should be any, what level of responsibility should platforms face? And so I've been keeping tabs on that. And so in October, plans are either in October or later. Plans are for me to kind of give a rundown to EFF members on, what's going on with that, with CDA 230. So that's what I've been working on, just keeping tabs.
Cool. And the CDA 230, kind of explain how that is relevant to this question of content on platforms.
Yeah, absolutely. So what it is, it's a section of the Communications Decency Act which classifies online platforms as, and I'm a little rusty on the actual terminology, ICSs, which is interactive computer services. And so they're exempt from publisher liability. And so what it is that basically if you're, say you're Reddit, for example, you've got, an immense amount of user generated content being, funneled through your platform. And it's just impossible for platforms to be able to check each piece of user generated content. And so the way the legislation works is that it sort of takes, it relieves them of the responsibility for the most part to have to, police, content going through. And so, so basically whatever users share, platforms aren't automatically, responsible for that. Yeah.
Anybody else?
So
David, what have you been working on?
Oh.
Yeah, no, you go ahead.
Oh, cool. Sorry. So I've actually been I've thrusted myself into the plunges and abyss of learning more about the surveillance and, the history and culture around surveillance. We had discussed, among the board a couple meetings ago, actually, kind of establishing a reading group of some sort. So I've been looking for literature that, we could use to have a kind of reading group between, board members and also with just anyone that wants to join. And actually one of the books that I found is about policing using big data. And so I've been just looking at some of the other stuff by the author. He's a professor a law professor, and he's also a member of the ACLU. So he seems like a pretty good resource. I've also done some research and trying to just find, the justifications for mass surveillance. And it's just really interesting seeing how it's very expensive, but it yields not satisfying results in comparison to how much is being spent. So just just generally looking into things to see what kind of I guess resources and pieces I can put together for future site content and reading groups and whatnot.
How would you put the reading group together? Would it be mostly via email?
Yeah, I would. We have a mailer list, so I would probably reach out to Kevin because I'm not sure exactly how it works, but get the word out via that, and we also have our Facebook page and whatnot, and just say, hey, this is the book we plan on reading. If you'd like to join up and read along and discuss once every couple weeks or once a week, then this is what we're doing.
I mean, yeah, I mean, we technically have a moribund Slack channel. We might facilitate a book club with that, or maybe we'll decide that Discord's better, or maybe we'll decide Mattermost is better. But I would think that'd probably be the way to facilitate that. I'm pretty sure Discord is how Future Fossils is managing their book club.
Chris, how about you?
Oh, I've been working on our paperwork and trying to keep track of Lindsey Graham and his EARN Act, which would basically backdoor encryption in the United States and the world. And I guess one good thing for COVID-19 is that's kind of gotten pushed to the back burner as the Senate's time is consumed with dealing with coronavirus.
I guess a lot of people probably don't realize that it's not like we've always had access to encryption. And when the internet was first mainstreaming, encryption was really not something that you could get your hands on and use. And we didn't have like SSL, which we now use for commercial transactions and that sort of thing. Right. And there was actually a big fight, which EFF was a big part of, to get access to encryption.
That's correct. I actually remember that quite well, having lived through it. Dating myself, but I actually got onto the internet before there was a World Wide Web. Just barely, 1988, not 1989, when the web RFCs first came out. And it was a huge deal when Mozilla came up with the 56-bit SSL encryption for export and the mighty 128-bit SSL encryption for domestic use. And that actually made e-commerce possible because, and I remember having done this, there were, you would go on the vendor's website and you would place an order, and then you would call them with a credit card that then they would then clear, or you would mail them a check and then they would ship your stuff. And that was a pain.
Yeah, we started a site called Fringeware years ago. We started a company called Fringeware, and we were going to sell various things online. And of course, when we talked to the bank about accepting credit cards, they told us we were out of our minds because at that time there was no encryption. And I had a kind of genius partner at the time who actually could have created an encryption strategy for us, even though SSL didn't exist yet. But the banks were just not up for it. And that was going to be a barrier to the rollout of e-commerce. And of course, it was clear to people that e-commerce was a potentially big deal. So they got behind encryption for that. But you had to kind of clear up the fear, uncertainty, and doubt, especially within the government, about rolling out encryption so that anybody and everybody could use it.
Yeah, I recall in those days, encryption was actually treated like it was a weapon of mass destruction as far as the federal government was concerned.
Well, it really was. And you were not supposed to export it. You could get in trouble for having encryption that you shared outside the USA. And the person who... Oh, go ahead.
It was actually regulated under ITAR, the International something agreement on something, but it's basically it's the same set of treaties and laws that regulate arms dealers.
Yeah, it was actually treated as munitions.
Yeah, it was treated that like that. Now it's kind of interesting because all these people in the governments around the world actually are putting their head in the sand and saying, encryption doesn't exist, but the cat's out of the bag, the code's out of the bag. If you want encryption and you've got skills that you can compile something on your local machine, boom, you've got secure encryption, and there's nothing anybody can do about it.
It's so funny, actually, Chris, that you point to that, sort of wanting to pretend encryption, doesn't exist. That, like, I encounter people all the time who will give me a counter argument when I'm arguing for things like privacy or against surveillance via algorithmic surveillance, facial recognition surveillance. You'll encounter people, and admittedly, it's actually one of the better counter arguments, where they'll be like, well, the cat's out of the bag. The technology is ubiquitous. We can't stop it. And I'm like, well, fine, but same goes with encryption then, cat's out of the bag.
Yep,
It's true.
As long as you've got an old, Linux or FreeBSD source code CD lying around somewhere, it's out of the bag. And
So
there's billions of them out there.
I need to make another introduction. Heather Barfield, who is also a member of the EFF Austin board, has joined us. And I should also mention that I'm also a member of the EFF Austin board. I didn't mention that earlier.
Did we mention Maggie's on the board too?
We did mention that.
Okay,
yeah.
good.
And Heather, what are you working on?
Can you hear me though?
I can hear you. You sound great.
Oh, okay. Because Kevin, somebody took my headphones. So
I don't know anything about that, but sorry if somebody did do that.
So I'm good. I'm actually realizing that I've been so busy the last 2 weeks. I've been in like virtual conferences for 2 weeks. And then this week I'm in like more Zoom conferencing. But I really, I just learned that a kind of a writing mentor that I have now who's trying to help me to get something published, he just wrote an article, well, maybe not just, but in 2018, he published an article in Theater Topics, which is in my field in performance studies in theater, on deep fakes. And then he was about that Jordan Peele video in which like he put on Obama's voice, which he could do so well. And then he sort of did that deep fake in which it was like the words were coming out of Obama's mouth that were like kind of ludicrous. Like, Obama would never say that. And so he wrote this whole article on what he's calling like post-fact performance styles, and like how we're like in a post-fact world and the effect that that has on performance studies and identity and on digital identities. So I'm trying to figure out, Jon, is there a link? Because he's not on Facebook. Can he watch this if I were to send him a link that's like not on Facebook Live or something? Or can you watch it if you're not on Facebook? I don't know.
I guess currently, as we're streaming live, he might not be able to watch it without getting onto Facebook, like logging in, but
right.
It will be published to YouTube after the fact.
Yes,
okay, good.
Yeah, I'm recording it right now, and it generally takes me until the next day to turn around processing the video, cutting out the stupid stuff at the beginning and the end that people don't want to hear, and then posting it to our YouTube channel.
Yeah, these happy hours have a long tail.
Yeah.
Well,
And it lags a lot.
I mean, I guess my whole point, and like I guess in like as introduction of sorts, is that there's so much crossover in online performativity and of course surveillance culture and the distortion of self online, and how like this is being manipulated for political purposes, but can also be manipulated for positive political purposes. And you know, the idea of propaganda is nothing new. And the thing that like really interests me is like how can those on the digital frontier, on the electronic frontier, rethink identity in a post-fact world? Because
as the frontier is being settled somewhat too. I mean, we've been on the frontier for a while now.
But
And
see,
I
I
don't-
loved anonymity. So I loved being able to like make up names and become somebody else, right? And I love being able to and pretend. But now we're restricted, right? We have so many regulations on who we can be now because you have to have your real name. I mean, generally, and of course, the damage that had caused at one point, the uproar onto the trans community and being able to be identified as under your real name, and how Facebook wouldn't allow you to have, the name that your chosen name. I feel like we've just gotten to this point where it's like, here's the question: do deep fakes actually matter? Does it matter? Do deep fakes matter?
Well, it depends on how they're used and how well they're believed, I guess. I mean, I kept wishing last night as I was watching the Axios, the interview with Donald Trump, that I was seeing a deep fake video. In that case, it would have been good if it was a deep fake.
Right. It was so surreal. Like, how are you like, like, is this actually happening? I don't know if people know what we're talking about, but maybe there's a link somewhere that can be posted about it.
I mean, I've seen multiple people in shock about that video, so I think word has gotten around about that interview. But
It's easy to find. It's on YouTube. You can just Google Axios Donald Trump and search it on YouTube and find it.
Yeah, I watched him earlier today, guesting on CNN, and kind of dissecting the interview. So I believe it's real, but the technology behind deepfakes is getting better and better. And from what I've read, a majority of deepfakes is concentrating on the porn biz, and that's where deepfakes are really, causing grief for a lot of innocent people. So I can see
I bet
that.
that's where they originated.
But I'm totally in favor.
yes, John. That is where they originated, in amateur porn face replacement. The guy who came up with the algorithm that's literally the first thing he used it for.
Chris has
totally
his hand
in
up.
favor of people using their real name, though. I would never. Wait, I think I did. Never mind. Scoop is not a real name.
Chris?
Things that Heather reminded me of. Have you seen the MIT deepfake video of Nixon delivering the message that the Apollo astronauts were lost?
No.
You haven't?
I heard about it. I didn't watch it yet.
Go look
Somebody locate that link.
It is chilling how good it is. It's Nixon's voice. It's his face. It's the desk. It's the entire Oval Office. It is chilling. And I remember that moon landing as a child, and I was just like, I was almost crying when it was over because it was so real. So go look that up. And then I'm sure people on this have heard of Lincoln Project. They did a sort of real life deep fake. There is a comedian named J.L. Chauvin who specializes in doing Trump-like things, and the man's voice is uncannily like Trump. The first time I heard him, I didn't see the video. I thought it was Trump. He is that good. And so they did a thing today where they got him to record a spot endorsing the Democratic opponent to one of the Alaskan senators in the current election. And so again, go look that up. It's uncannily, and turn off the video or turn your, look away from the monitor. You'll think it's Trump.
Right. What this basically says is that you can't necessarily believe what you see anymore. If you see it on video.
Yeah. You're seeing it with your own eyes. You can't believe it.
Absolutely. I actually, our mutual friend Michael Garfield, who does the Future Fossils podcast and community, he calls this problem the end of reality, which I think is the most succinct way of putting it. But everybody keeps talking about the October surprise, and I'm like, the October surprise could easily be a deep fake all of us fall for. And mind you, I'm not saying that it'll necessarily be some deep fake trying to make Trump look good and his opposition look bad. It could just as easily be the other way around. and none of us will be able to know because our brains are wired to trust what we see.
Right.
But technology's gotten to the point we can't do that anymore.
Well, I think there are solutions to this that are technical solutions. They kind of touch on Heather's identity thing, because I've been thinking about ways to guarantee that you are interacting with an online identity, not necessarily a person, because persons can have multiple identities. It's like I've got an identity.
Ghosts in the machine are people, my friend.
Yes. It's like I've got an identity on this side. I've got a different identity on this side. I've got a different identity over here, but they're all very long-lived online, and so it all started out when I was on a consulting gig, and we all landed at the airport, and one of the guys said, "Okay, who's going to go find the trustworthy weed dealer?" And so it's like, how do you know that this entity that you're dealing with online is trustworthy? Well, we actually have some technologies to build histories and build, kind of social trustworthiness histories, using something like blockchain. And if you've interacted with this person on this website and you've done something for them, and they attest to it, then that goes onto your identity chain. And so then if I bump into you online for the first time, I can go back and I can look at this chain and say, okay, this person seems to do what they say that they will do 95% of the time, therefore I will enter into this business transaction. And I think that something similar can be done with online videos. I think that you can tie a video to an identity, and then that identity can vouch for the video. And so sure, an identity can vouch for deep fakes, just like the Russian trolls vouch for each other. But you can look at the lot of them on Twitter and you can say, these are all untrustworthy identities. I'm not going to deal with them. I'm not going to believe them.
This does kind of get to that question of anonymity again. And I'm thinking about how one of the most influential entities around right now is Q. And nobody knows who the hell Q is. Or Q could be like a bunch of people. Some people say it's Donald Trump. Q could be a bot.
Q doesn't exist, in my opinion. Q is a whole bunch of people spouting crap.
To John's point, if we're living in a bad sci-fi novel, Q is a sentient AI born of the internet trolling all of us.
Well, the interesting thing about it is that Q
was the
has
500-pound
reputation.
hacker that Trump mentioned at the debates years ago.
Well, Q has reputation. I mean, people believe that Q is a reliable source. Now, how is that even possible that a completely anonymous entity, I think there is some means by which those posts or drops, as they call them, from Q are shown to be authoritative. But I can't,
it's similar. It's similar to what Julian Assange and WikiLeaks would do back in the day, where the posts get cryptographically signed with a key that only the real person has. So it's supposed to verify it's the real person making the post. And I mean, to Chris's point, I've thought about the deepfakes problem from a technical standpoint as well. And I suspect the ultimate solution that will be happened upon is going to be similar to much like websites currently get digital certificates. I suspect photos and video will eventually get something similar, and much like your browser tells you, yep, this certificate for this website checks out, you're visiting what you think you're visiting, you'll see photos and video on the internet that will basically guarantee this has not been modified from its original form in any way. And now I would be against it if we created an internet where you can't modify images, because what would we do without our memes? But still, you'd at least know, okay, this has been modified. It might not be real.
So you're saying that we should come up with a Better Homes and Gardens seal of approval like our moms and dads used to rely upon in a different age.
Yeah, when your slightly, you know, conspiracy tinged uncle shares that video purporting that, look, this is totally what's going on, you can be like, well, it isn't signed. That video could be fake. How do I know?
Well, one thing that concerns me is, you know, all of us on this show have been involved in technology and media and related fields for a long time, but out in the general public, this tends to create a whole atmosphere of pure paranoia. Who do you trust? Well, you know, a lot of them consider Donald Trump as a reliable source, and they even think that maybe he's actually real.
Well, it's not just those folks. It's all the spiritual New Age people that are jumping on the QAnon bandwagon right and left too. And then when you try to reason in any way with these folks, they're just convinced that you've been absorbed into the conspiracy yourself, and it's just this. It's just a massive. There's a word for it. It's just I can't say it on the air.
But well, I mean, if somebody comes out speaking out against pedophilia, obviously all of us would go along with that, right? Nobody likes a pedophile except maybe another pedophile. Mm-hmm. But in fact, I'm not sure. I really don't. I can't believe that there's that many pedophiles around, and I didn't think they ate pizza either. But that's something that you could seize on that will sell, basically. So you can, you know, you can make this argument that there's an elite bunch of people who are pedophiles, and then something like the Epstein thing happens, and that lends some authority to that argument.
Or the Wayfair gate. You know about Wayfair, right?
Yeah, I heard that too.
That one's fun. Look into it if you haven't looked into it yet. It's a rabbit hole.
So Ritika, we were talking about deep fakes. From your perspective as an attorney, what do you think about the legal implications of deep fakes?
You know, I'm not really sure. It's completely new technology. I don't really know much about it from a technical perspective. I mean, in the entertainment sphere, I could see there being a lot of, you know, issues when it comes to, you know, your likeness and your, you know, rights of exclusivity over that, like publicity rights. That comes to mind when I put my lawyer hat on. But as far as, you know, as far as civil liberties goes, totally uncharted territory. So, you know, I'm interested to see how that develops.
Yeah, I was wondering about a situation, for instance, where somebody creates a deep fake that shows somebody doing something really heinous, and they publish that.
Yeah.
What would the crime be? I mean, or what would
I could see it being a tort?
Be?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say. I imagine there would be some sort of, you know, it would be a basic tort that, you know, you just, I guess you'd have to capture it by way of metaphor. So,
could you make potentially a libel slander case that you've damaged my reputation? Because, you know, we all know that people on the internet are very quick to form mobs and don't necessarily investigate if the accusations are true or not. And a deep fake can be very convincing.
I mean, your guess is as good as mine. Perhaps it would be, you know, it is a publication. I mean, I guess it would depend whether the deep fake is a statement. You know, it really depends on how it maps on to the elements of something like defamation.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering about it. It's such a new way of making a representation. Usually, we think of libel and slander as being associated with statements somebody makes about somebody. In a way, a deep fake could be a visual statement or could be interpreted as that, but there's no case law for that now.
Yeah, exactly.
It could also be used for some reason, this old Monty Python skit popped into my head of, you know, blackmail. It could be used for blackmail too. I mean, it's kind of horrific. It could be for, you know, you don't like your neighbor, so, you know, you want to put out this video or threaten to or whatever. Just that's the kind of stuff that scares me.
Yeah, and like the act of blackmailing is, it's a crime in its own right. So I imagine like if the intent is there, then you could probably, I guess like deep fake crimes that are perpetuated by deep fake technologies could be sort of roped in that way.
But think of how long it would take to like untangle all that. Somebody's already unleashed their deep fake wrath upon you, and then it's like, okay, where did this come from? Now that the whole mob has tarred and feathered me and all that stuff,
Yeah, it's funny. There's been this raging intellectual debate in certain corners of the internet, like on cancel culture, and anybody who's been following my opinion on it, I think frankly a lot of it's a little overblown. But I actually think something that is worrisome that I wish more people were talking about, concerned about, would be the potential for deep fakes to get somebody canceled who should not have been canceled because it was faked, it was made up.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there are currently a number of groups that are studying the technology and that would identify deep fakes, and they've had some success. Some people that really go into it in an organized manner in which they analyzed the actual audio waveform, and they analyzed the video in its various layers, and then they compare other legitimate stock video that they have of the same person to identify quirks on the deep fake that the real person exhibits that don't show up on the deep fake. And there's work being done in that area, but I have the feeling that the technology is going to just keep increasing to the point where it will be very difficult, even at a technical level, to identify whether something is real or not.
Well, maybe from a philosophical, I missed recent Plutopia News Network happy hours, but thinking sort of Buddhist thinking, maybe this is our way of simulating or modeling that reality is a complete illusion, as we say in Buddhism. So maybe I was thinking a lot about this being away from the cloud of noise that is our big city, which is now across the 1 million person threshold, and being out in the absolute complete silence of the desert. And it was pretty profoundly shocking to me when I just came back to it, how just pervasive and overwhelming it is. And, hey dog, knock it off. And just, like, when I was far enough away from it and seeing it from the outside, everything was kind of obvious what's BS and what's kind of real. But when you're in the thick of it, now I'm back here, I'm kind of like, help me, run away. It's like,
this reality is a distributed deep fake.
Yeah,
well, I can piggyback on what Maggie's saying about the whole, simulation of reality aspect. I think that's kind of that is the benefit that we're seeing from the ontological crisis that deepfakes are creating, because now we're faced with the realization that just because we're interpreting something, seeing it, doesn't necessarily mean it's real. So I think that now that it's blaringly evident that this is possible, this is a time that we could, take to train ourselves and normalize, considering that maybe the world that you believe in just might not necessarily be it. And so as there are consequences, I think that this is also a great learning opportunity for us to move forward and, look toward actually educating ourselves and finding information as opposed to just believing what makes us feel comfortable about what might be real.
Yeah.
Ask.
I mean, to your point, David, I mean, I think it was Gibson who even originally put, cyberspace as a shared mass hallucination,
Consensus hallucination, yeah.
Right. And, it also, it makes me think of one of my favorite chapters in Neil Gaiman's Sandman, Dream of a Thousand Cats, where it's all about like this cat Jesus prophet who basically tells all the cats that that the world used to be different, you know, and actually it used to be that cats were the humans and humans were the cats' slaves / pets. But one human one day figured out that dreams make reality, and he dreamed so hard he dreamed into an existence a world where humans were in charge. And the cat prophet's like, we can do it back if we all just manifest it, you know. And I've always said, you know, yeah, that story actually to me gets something really deep and profound that I think deepfakes are forcing us to contend with something very primal about whatever the nature of this thing we're all experiencing together is. I hope
I have to comment that I live in a house where the humans are slave to the cat.
Well, I mean, anybody with wisdom knows that's how it is, but a lot of humans have tricked themselves.
Right.
So before we go any farther, I mean, deepfakes are fascinating. We got pretty quickly away from 230, but I was just remembering that Trump has created this, I guess it's being characterized as a petition for new rules that he has sent to the FCC. And the FCC is about to have a period of open comment on Trump's proposals. And I'm not myself familiar with the things that Trump is requesting, though I know it has something to do with Section 30 of the CDA, 230 of the CDA. And I'm wondering, are any of you conversant with what Trump is proposing?
I might have a guess just based on what little I have followed on the debate, and you know, Ritika may know some things I don't, but I suspect that he's probably going to make an argument along the lines of that the platforms are not just content distributors, that because they modify and curate the content, that they're publishers, and a publisher is not subject to Section 230 protections. A content provider is.
But you would need an order for that, would you? I mean, that's already the case.
I mean, yes and no, because the platforms argue, well, there's a lot of legal chicanery going around. For one thing, this little distinction of like whether they're publishers or content providers, Section 230, if you read the language, it applies regardless which one they are. It applies to all website operators, period. Yeah. So it's a bit of legal fiction conservative lawyer groups like the Heritage Foundation are using to try to put lipstick on this pig.
Yeah, so in essence, what 230 does is it says, if I post libelous or slanderous content to some place like Reddit, because it's a popular target, I'm the one that's held responsible, not Reddit in general. So, and that is the way it should be. And you know, you're absolutely right, Kevin. They are trying to argue that that Reddit is a publisher because they take down content that is offensive. Well, they take down content very rarely. I mean, it took them until late last year to take down the Donald subreddit, which was nothing but hate speech and racism. And so
let's not forget the Great Awakening that spawned QAnon, which was basically an apocalyptic death cult on Reddit.
Well, actually, I think that the first I heard of QAnon was on 4chan, and there was a big controversy that, because I don't look at 4chan, but I track some websites that kind of follow 4chan stuff, and because I can't do 4chan.
Good, you're sane.
Yes.
I mean, who does, really?
Right. But there was this big controversy that I heard about very early on in the QAnon days, where one of the QAnon identities was actually open on one of the prime QAnon followers, with write privileges. So it's like this guy got caught on video with access to the QAnon identity. And it's like, so everybody, there were a bunch of people that said, oh, this is all fake, and they left. But, since then, it's as so many things do from 4chan that I can't quite figure out why, it took off and expanded over and took over the entire web. So I don't know.
For a minute there, I was sharing the executive order, but it's pretty much what we were thinking it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, I suspected it was that legal argument just because I have an old acquaintance from my college days who most of my school is of the liberal persuasion, but there is the rare conservative, and yeah, he's like in the law space, and this was the bullshit he was spouting to try to show why what Trump was doing was not bullshit. So I suspected that was probably the "you're not an idiot" conservative argument trying to justify it.
It seems like it'd be self-defeating for the Donald, because stuff he puts out on Twitter, they're finally pushing back on that. But if they change it, then the first thing they'll have to do is get rid of him, because he'll be so abusive that they'll be afraid of losing their business because of the Donald and his weird statements.
Well, maybe they'll finally enforce the terms of service. Fancy that.
Yeah, hoist on his own card.
I'm seeing that this is potentially putting them out of service. I don't think that Facebook and Twitter could operate if they didn't have a safe harbor provision.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the thing. It's like the nature of these platforms would be. It just would look unrecognizable, because they'd have, the way they'd go about it is over censorship, over correction. If they had to, moderate every piece of content that's being published onto their site, if they come within the realm of publisher responsibility.
Yeah, it'd be a lot like the early days of the World Wide Web before we got the safe harbor for ISPs and websites under copyright. It's been too long since I thought about that.
Yeah, and they're going, they're going to err on the overly censorious side that'll displease everyone, because, things that don't offend most people often offend enough people that they'll still make the calculus of, we'll get too many complaints about that, it's banned.
And if Facebook goes away, we won't be able to do this anymore. But we'll be happy. We won't be worrying about that guy who posted that nebulous bullshit,
Oh yeah, that dude who clearly is subtweeting me and isn't man enough to tell me to my face.
So we've got about 10 minutes left. And one thing that we haven't talked about is something that I know you guys are looking at, this question of facial recognition. So what's happening with that?
Well, first of all, I was remiss, but I should actually share the link in the comments here. But so the thing is all of you have a request from moi, which is to distribute this to your communities far and wide and be annoying and get as many people as possible to sign this dang thing. Because what's happening right now is, so I've spoken with Nash, who's currently running the Electronic Frontier Alliance at EFF. This is Nash's personal campaign that he's running at EFF about FACE. But it's basically about trying to get enough signatures in various cities across the country that citizens can basically come to their city councils and say, look, there are hundreds, or even if you're lucky, thousands of concerned citizens who want you to do something about this technology, and not wait for a federal law that may never come, or if it comes, be too weak or watered down. We're having a national conversation in this country right now about the appropriate limits and roles of law enforcement, particularly as it affects communities of color. And facial recognition is a big part of that discussion, because as been shown repeatedly, the technology was built with training models around white male faces. It is very inaccurate against people who are not white and male. And so law enforcement using a biased technology against already discriminated communities and being trained on data that takes these historical biases of enforcement in place, and the technology, far from being neutral, will just further cement the existing discrimination in our system, but with the veneer of technological impartiality. So as part of the conversation in Austin going on right now about defunding the police and redistributing funds, we've already gotten city council members making commitments to trying to ban non-lethal rounds and other forms of police weaponry, but we shouldn't forget about surveillance technology in that discussion. And that's, I think, what the About Face campaign is about and what we're trying to do here.
Yeah, when I signed it, there were almost 3,000 signatures already. And that was...
Well, that's across the whole country, Chris. We're not doing quite that well in Austin yet.
Okay, I thought that was just the Austin one.
No. Well, there were only about 33 in Austin as of 4 or 5 days ago. We've already almost doubled that. So we're not doing as well as you wish, Chris, but we are getting some momentum building. And I want to try to get us to at least several hundred. That'd be the bare minimum, I think, before we could even talk to council about it, before we wouldn't be laughed out of the room. So share.
I just wonder how widely used facial recognition software is. I know that there was this thing about Rite Aid recently that it's got like 200 stores that were employing facial recognition. And when people sort of found out about it and there was a bit of a stink about it, they said, oh, well, we stopped doing that. But I mean, it could be everywhere.
It could be, and it's hard to know because so the Austin Police Department's budget is ostensibly public, their requisition orders. And so, I did a bit of digging in it, and actually EFF has a wonderful tool called Atlas of Surveillance that lets you dig all over the country and see what various law enforcement agencies have publicly declared as far as surveillance purchases. But here's the fun thing. It's very hard to know what APD is or is not using when it comes to surveillance, because while apparently they're required under law to report all their purchases, they're not required to be very specific about what they bought. Like if they buy a piece of software, they don't have to say the name of the software they bought. They can just like itemize it as software, $15,000, and we don't know what software they just bought. So there is not as much transparency as you would hope. They could be using facial recognition technology. I don't have any way of knowing right now with current city transparency laws. I can tell you that the Texas DPS is using facial recognition.
How are they using it?
When you do your driver's license photos, that picture you take is entered into a facial recognition system that is logged in some state database somewhere. I don't know all the details.
How would they use that?
I don't know.
I mean, we know how they capture it. We don't know how they're using it. Okay.
I mean, there may be more information. I don't personally know, but I do know they are doing that. Like in EFF's Atlas of Surveillance, they flag the Texas DPS as a user of facial recognition.
Well, one recent thing I had been reading about the local law enforcement fusion centers and their surveillance over protesters. And that sounds like a bit of a overkill there. Just they were sorting through people's social media, and that's not just local PD. It's all sorts of law enforcement agencies that take part in the fusion centers.
I mean, yeah, we actually several years ago at the EFF Austin meetups, thanks to our old board member Greg Foster and his contacts, we actually had at the time head of of ORIC, the Austin Regional Intelligence Center, our fusion center, actually came and spoke at the EFF Austin meetup. I think there is a video of it on our website way back there. He was, good at his job. He was very polite and friendly, and I'll give him credit for that. He agreed to come and talk to us, even though he knew we weren't going to be a friendly audience. He didn't actually reveal that much of the internal workings, obviously, and he's there to defend what they do. But
I think Greg was a citizen advisor to those guys, wasn't he?
Yeah, I think with the hope of that he would steer it towards non-1980-40 applications. I think his probably failures to prevent that were one of many reasons that Greg may have decided to depart us for beautiful Washington.
Yeah, from what I've read about the fusion centers, it's essentially a national and maybe even international network. it's essentially a new law enforcement agency. It just it doesn't have a particular badge that I've ever seen.
They were established in the wake of 9/11 to sort of, one of the 9/11 commission things was, oh, this wouldn't have happened if data between all these intelligence agencies wasn't siloed and they'd actually all been talking to each other and could have put two and two together. And so that's where these fusion centers came from. But there's not really a lot of regulation around what data they're allowed to collect and how they're allowed to share it around the network. And there is little to no transparency.
Right. The data that they collect winds up being shared under the most permissive jurisdictions rules. So like APD, DPS, and FBI, DHS, all those other, all these different organizations, CBP, since we're close to the border here, all have basically presence in the Fusion Center here in Austin. And they're supposed to get together and, say, hey, I arrested Juan Hernandez with 3 kilos of cocaine on a traffic stop, from DPS, say. And they say, oh, you got Juan Hernandez? Is he in jail? Because he's wanted on, these charges. And so that's kind of the idea of the way the fusion centers are supposed to operate. I don't know that they actually meet that goal, because I don't know if it actually works. I've never seen or heard of anything that says, oh, the fusion center was vital in making this arrest of this drug gang or this hacker gang or this whatever gang.
Yeah, we have a hard way of knowing if it actually works because they don't release any data because it's all secret. I would suspect it's probably not very effective if the success rate of some of the NSA's programs is anything to go by, because I think the NSA with the warrantless surveillance program eventually copped to, after spending absurd billions of dollars and surveilling every American's, all their communications for almost 20 years, that it had maybe prevented one terrorist doing one attack, maybe. And they still might have got them through other means. So it's totally worth it.
And just to make everyone feel a little safer, the information centers that host at least the Texas region area of the Fusion Center, it's like an association and they're all divided among regions. But I don't know if you guys are aware, but I think Scoop was kind of talking about the whole Blue Leaks phenomenon that kind of, disclosed exactly what, the Fusion Centers were doing to monitor and surveil protesters. So the way that information was attained was via a hacking. So not only just information been published luckily to the public, but now who knows what other information is in the hands of hackers or whoever committed this breach of data. So they can collect this data, but they can't hold on to it securely. And again, the issue kind of just intensifies.
John, are we getting booted here?
Yeah, I was going to say David Hensley gets the last word. It's time to end our conversation, but we really appreciate you guys joining us. This has been a great conversation, and we do hope that you'll come back in the near future and do another one of these.
Thank you for coming by, folks. We enjoy.
Makes for a great panel.
You can stay in touch with Plutopia at plutopia.io. On Facebook, look for @Plutopia News. On Twitter, it's @Plutopia. This is the Plutopia News Network, 20 minutes into the future.